everybody. Welcome to episode 315 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 18th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me on Blue Sky at SLU Podcast or on X, formerly known as Twitter. My handle is at LMS_United. On Facebook, Instagram, and Threads, you can find me at School Librarians United and the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And now for today's episode, Canadian Teacher Librarian, and my conversation with Aggie Gasior. Friends, I'm so excited. Aggie Gasior, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Friends, we are in for a treat. It has been a while since I've connected with somebody outside of the United States. Aggie, would you share with us where in the world you work and what is your current job title?
Sure. So I work just outside of Toronto, like literally the street that divides Toronto from Thornhill. My school is on the north side of the street. I work for a fairly large English-speaking board called York Region District School Board. My current job title is Teacher Librarian. So teachers in our board at least, to become a librarian, you need to be a teacher first, and then you take additional courses to become a librarian. So Teacher Librarian is what they call us. And in addition to that, I'm also the core French teacher in the school.
So let's figure out what your day breaks down to, so you're teaching French.
Yes.
To Canadian students.
Yes.
And then you're also their librarian. So what does that day look like?
So my morning block, all our blocks are 100 minutes. They're divided into 100-minute blocks. They're not the periods are 40, 40, and 20, but if you chunk it together, 100-minute blocks. So my morning is in the library. I see probably about 6 classes a week regularly. All my primaries come through. We're a JK through grade 8 school. And then my 2 afternoon blocks chunks are all French. So 4 classes of French.
I'm fascinated to hear how you've made this all work. But when you put this in the context of your day and appreciate that a fair amount of your day is spent teaching students how to speak French, you have managed to do a great deal. How has teaching French impacted your collection development? And I know we're getting ahead of ourselves when we're talking about your library, but you're teaching French to a significant number of your students. How does that influence what you do in your library?
So that's a good question. I actually this is my 3rd year here, and my first year here, I taught, in addition to library, I was the grade 1-2 teacher. I shared a homeroom. And the reason I started teaching French is my colleague is on mat leave, and I'm covering for her. And when I came into the role, my other colleague who has been teaching French the whole time he's been here, he asked me, can we get more French books? We had barely anything. We had a few picture books, a few nonfiction, and some really high-level French books that even French immersion students wouldn't be able to read. So I've spent this year using some of our Scholastic Book Fair points to buy some French titles. I'd say our collection has grown substantially from one shelf to a whole bookshelf. And most of it is graphic novels because that's what students will gravitate towards when they're learning a new language. So sometimes they even pick up The Dog Man in French and come check it out. And it's like the little kindergarten grade 1 kids and they're so excited. And I'm like, this is the French version, right? So then they go and exchange it. But yeah, I would say it's developed a lot since I joined the French kind of team.
Well, and I know that people who speak more than one language can look at a translation of a book that was originally written in one language and translated into another and sort of decide whether or not it's a quality read in the other language because you speak more than one. And can I just say, have you been pleased with Scholastic Book Fair's translated books of English titles?
Yeah, I have been. I mean, we have to, everything we do in Canada is, our two official languages are French and English. So if they provide something in English, they have to provide it in French as well in the education environment. So the translations are fairly accurate. Some of the French slang is a little bit harder for them to understand, so we have to teach it to them. But I mean, core French students, they only have about 40 to 60 minutes of French a day. So it's very beginner basic French. And it starts in grade 4. And they have to take it from grade 4 to grade 9. And only after grade 9 are they allowed to drop French.
Fascinating. Again, questions I get to ask a Canadian. These are not questions that we necessarily get to ask, our American counterparts. You and I met recently. We're now friends who text, but we met very recently on Blue Sky. I'm really grateful because you and I did not cross paths on any other social media platform, but you were listening to the podcast.
I was, yes. I found your podcast probably in like November or December. I just did a search in Spotify for library podcasts, and yours came up, and I started listening. And I binge listened through the first 2 episodes, every episode by episode. And then I kind of started jumping around for the episodes that kind of targeted what I was looking for and what I was interested in. And I remember there was one episode where people were calling in and talking about recommendations or tips. And somebody had mentioned Blue Sky, but I wasn't really paying attention. And then it was your last guest that you had recently, the Blue Sky 101 episode. And I was like, okay, I'll give it a try, because I had tried Twitter way back in the day when Twitter first came out, and I just couldn't get on it. I didn't like sort of the choppy language and the format of it, and I gravitated towards Instagram more. And then when Twitter became X, I was just completely not interested. And yeah, so I tried Blue Sky out and we connected, and yeah, I guess it was like a month ago even.
Yeah, I mean, it really is sort of a fun. I mean, it is something I'm realizing that as somebody who has been on Instagram and barely, but I've been on X pretty faithfully for the past 5 or 6 years, and there are people I'm meeting for the very first time on Blue Sky, which is really a wonderful sort of thing to discover that we're still finding new friends on social media. So, the timing of this episode is perfect because I cannot remember a time in recent history when the relationship between the United States and Canada has been this fraught. While I cannot speak on behalf of my nation, but I'm just going to say out loud for everybody, I am so grateful that I live so close to Canada. So, friends, if you haven't been tuning in, I am about 10 minutes from Windsor, Ontario. Detroit is across the river from Windsor, Ontario. We will have 2 bridges very soon. We currently have 1 bridge, and we have 1 underwater international tunnel, which I have run both in the Detroit Marathon. And we start and end in Detroit, but we run over the bridge and through the tunnel on the way back. And we spend about 4 miles officially in international waters and over in Canada. But I can be in Canada in about 10 minutes. It takes me 35 minutes to get to work in Detroit. So, yeah. And also, when it comes right down to it, I can be in Toronto in 3.5 hours. It takes me 4.5 hours to get to Chicago. So, yeah, I mean, we visit Canada all the time.
I used to visit the U.S. all the time.
Well, and I'm going to tell you right now, I don't want to belabor this, but it is a very unfamiliar space to be in when we have been as unfriendly to our neighbors as we currently are right now.
Yeah, it's been tough. It's been tough watching from here. I think we talked about it briefly yesterday when we connected, but every day I wake up and I open social media just to check what's going on, and I'm like, is this satire? Is this real? And I have to spend a couple minutes figuring out if what I'm watching is true or not. And it's shocking. It's shocking.
Well, and you have to appreciate, friends, that the economy in Metro Detroit and in Michigan is grinding to a halt because we are so interdependent. That is why the other bridge is being built right now, because we are so dependent on trade coming in from Canada to manufacture the cars that we are building here. Most of those parts are not made in Michigan. They are brought in from Canada. And so, yes, no, we are feeling the impact of this instantly. And I am very aware that people outside the United States are being warned not to visit because there isn't a guarantee that you won't in some way be detained for being here in the first place. And that is so unnerving. I already am aware that there are people outside the United States who don't come here because of the violence and especially the gun ownership is enough to discourage many people who have plenty of other places they can go visit. These are conversations I hear when I go to conferences like ALA, like ISTE, and this idea of why would I come to the United States when it's such a violent place? And it's very hard for me to hear that. I don't own a gun, but I'm very upset that people would decide not to come here because of our political situation. We don't generally dwell on the political, but I don't think we can at this point really ignore it. And I'm so grateful to have a representative from Canada who's going to help us out here. But we are incredibly interdependent with Canada. We have the longest international border between the United States and Canada. I think it is 9,000 kilometers. It is a world record of how many miles we have between our shared border. But, we are so interconnected. There's something like the majority of Canadians live within 100 kilometers of the U.S. border. And that's just wild when you think about it.
Yeah, we're very close to the border. I mean, the further north you go in Canada, the less enjoyable the climate is. It gets colder and colder. But yeah, it's been hard to be on this side, watching and listening, and also having family and friends who live in the U.S. I have two close friends whose husbands are working there right now, and they moved their whole families over to the U.S. And so they're watching every day, not sure stay or go. And yeah, I mean, our politics is fully intertwined with yours. We just had a provincial election. Our Conservative Party, so that would kind of be like your Republican Party, but not current Republican, like Republican of old, just won a third mandate in the province. And we have a federal election coming up at the end of April. So it was just called, and it's going to be a very quick turnaround just because our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, retired or stepped down. And then his successor, he was elected as the leader, Mark Carney, took over. And so he called an election just to make a fair representation. And so he's up against Pierre Poilievre from the Conservative Party. We're a multi-party system, technically. But so there's other parties that not just the Liberals and the Conservatives, but they're kind of like the leaders.
Well, I'm curious, though, even though you are skewing conservative, it doesn't sound like anybody in Canada is interested in becoming the 51st state.
No, and when we say conservative, I don't mean it's not Republican, like MAGA Republican. It's like your old Republican Party. So, like, we disagree with the Conservatives and Liberals here are more of like we disagree on taxation and we disagree on, developing oil fields. It's not talking about sovereignty issues and that kind of thing. So,
well, and I'm curious that ever since there has been this talk of the 51st state, there has been this very pro-Canadian sentiment.
Yes,
and it it makes all the sense in the world. Can you give us some examples of how you bring Canadians together in a sign of solidarity?
There's a joke going on in Canada because we have one province, Quebec, that has had a referendum way back in the day about wanting to split up from Canada. And there's a joke going around that when the Quebecois start being patriotic to Canada, you've really pissed off Canadians. So, yeah, there's been a few. I mean, the tariffs were the first thing that really hit our news cycle in terms of how your current president was affecting our country, and so that created a big push up here to buy Canadian. Almost all our big companies have come out with huge, we're Canadian, buy Canadian signs in grocery stores, and even some commercials that have come out just, talking about what is made in Canada and which products are brought in from overseas. And then recently there was an episode of Saturday Night Live and Mike Myers was on it, and he was wearing a Canada's Not for Sale shirt, and he did a sort of a symbol, a gesture of elbows up, and that's a testament to Gordie Howe, one of our hockey players, our Canadian hockey players of old, who would it was kind of his symbol of elbows up. He was gonna start a fight on the ice. Although ironically, he played, I think, for Detroit most of his career. So
Yes, yes, he did play for the
yeah,
Detroit Red Wings.
yeah,
Thank you very much. Yes. But also indicative of how much that
yeah,
interdependence, and that was very free flowing for the longest
yeah.
time. Again, as somebody who would regularly go to Windsor, Ontario for dinner, I was always welcome into the country to spend our money. Everyone was happy to welcome the Americans, and we never were really excited about going back because going through customs and coming back into the United States is always interesting, and it's a little tense. And I'm not going to lie, I have been my experiences coming back into the United States as an American citizen has been unpleasant. Um, our border patrol is not to be messed with, and I've actually had to vacate my car, and they did a complete search of our car in case we were bringing something back other than just the leftovers from dinner. So yes, unfortunately, the politics hopefully will not interfere with our ability to learn from one another in this conversation. I am so glad that you're here. So thank you so much. You've started to give us an idea of your day, that dividing your time between being a French teacher and being a teacher librarian. I'm fascinated to know, how do you establish that balance in your day? Do there are two different parts of you, and yet you never change the fact that you're the building's teacher librarian.
So it's hard. It's hard. My first 2 years here, I actually had part of my schedule was being a homeroom teacher, which up here just basically means you're kind of like in charge of the report card writing and the majority of the communication with the parents. We don't actually have like a homeroom period or anything like that. And so that was a lot harder. And now the French teachers up here, at least at my school, are considered specialty teachers. So we're covering other teachers' prep time. So it's a little less responsibility in terms of the homeroom responsibilities, I guess. But there's a lot more students. So I have about 85 students that I see when I'm teaching all 4 classes in a day. So it's a lot of balance. It's a lot of lunches and recesses in the library and staying a little bit late after work. But yeah, I do love it, and I can't imagine giving it up. So
Oh, absolutely. And I guess the hope is at some point somebody realizes, there's so much more. I mean, and we're going to talk a little bit about the evidence that you have started to assemble to share with your administration, because I think people would be absolutely blown away by the documentation that you've made. Let's talk about that fully flexible schedule, because when you're in the library, you do have a fully flexible schedule.
I do. Yeah, I'm lucky in that way. I came in as the new teacher librarian. The role had been filled. I I don't want to give the wrong number, but I think it was at least 4 years, if not more, with what we call LTO contracts, so long-term occasional teachers. So they didn't have a permanent contract teacher in the role, so there was a lot of turnover. So when I came in, I spent a lot of time getting to know the space. And I kind of just went with what I knew from my previous school, which was the teacher librarian at that school had set up weekly visits with all the classes. And she kind of took her flex schedule and turned it into a fixed. And so that's what I did my first year. I tried to see pretty much all the homeroom classes. So every single teacher would come through for about 30 to 40 minutes a week for programming. But I made the mistake as a newbie librarian, not saving myself any time for library management. So in addition to the full schedule in the library and then teaching grade 1, 2 that year, I was just burnt out by mid-year. So since then, I've been a little bit more careful with kind of preserving some times in my schedule for library management and for programming prep, that sort of thing. And so now I see all my primary classes. I think I mentioned that. There's 6 of them. So they come through once a week with their teacher. So I don't cover their prep. Their teacher's here to support with the programming, which is huge, especially with the primary students. And then my junior intermediate students, unfortunately, I don't get to see in the library. They come through with their homeroom teacher to do their book exchange. I do set up programming for them, but I can't be here to facilitate it. So, yeah.
But I love that, especially with your youngest students, you are going to have their classroom teacher in there, because when I taught the littles, I was their release time, and those teachers had that contractual release time. And if I got a wave at the door, that was it. I mean, sometimes the kids had to come up 3 flights of stairs and there was no teacher because they were standing at the bottom of the stairs and I was at the top. It was just, and you're appreciated. But really, it is just so they can get their contractual planning time. But it sounds like you've learned how to make it work. But it is interesting because and friends, I'm really excited because Aggie has shared her annual report, and like every person who comes on the show sharing a great deal of what they do, I think you get such a good visual of the kinds of things that you've done. You've taken amazing photos of your space. I feel like we get a really good sense of the space that you're working in. And so I'm really, really interested. So give us a sense of those classes versus your older students who come in with, their teachers just to do their book exchange.
When my youngers come in, I've kind of set up, I had an outline of a long-term plan, like a long-range plan with them. We spent the first month or so kind of setting up routines, learning library use, how to find a book, how to check out a book, all of sort of those routines and procedures that go with library use. And every time they come in, we start with a read aloud, and I try and match the read aloud to whatever we're learning. And then from there, we would have an activity, and then they would go through to their book exchange. I didn't do centers. I know some librarians tend to go towards centers where one group's doing something, the other group's doing checkout. But I just found that it was more organic to do the activity, and then as they were finished, they would transition to their checkout. And I'm lucky because most of my primary teachers, they help with the checkout. So they would do the check-in of books while I was reading, and then we would kind of alternate who was manning the computer and who was working with the students. It also lets me kind of work with students to do sort of that one-on-one discussion and help them pick out a book while their homeroom teacher manages the computer. So then from there we looked at how to use maker spaces. We talked about using the coding robots. Then we paused our program for the Forest of Reading. So we did 10 weeks of Forest of Reading. And so that's just like a reading program that our Ontario Library Association runs. And now we're going to be moving back to coding. And then we are finishing off with a STEM challenge that our board runs for all the grade levels.
Really?
Yeah.
So this is, it sounds like you don't have to plan that. You are hosting, that happens in your space?
So it's something we can choose to do. We have an amazing group of curriculum consultants, and sort of each part of the curriculum has a consultant that works with the board. They're just teachers that are contracted out for a certain period of time, and they work with the board and they create resources to help classroom teachers and librarians. And they're kind of like the connection between those curriculum documents that are kind of dry and making it something that is applicable in the classroom. And so we have this amazing curriculum consultant, Dennis Stam, and not STEM, but STEM. And he created something called the YRDSB Innovators of the Future STEM Challenge. And so every year they come up with challenges that are linked to the sustainable goals. And they're everything from kindergarten through to grade 12. And he has a challenge for each grade level, and it connects to the science curriculum. And they also provide training for us, and they provide the materials for it if we need it. And then, you just work through the engineering design process in the library, and the students can submit their creations to the challenge. And it's just like a showcase that's shared over a Google slide presentation. Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, and friends, if we can, don't be sure to check out the links in the show notes. And Aggie has shared so much of what you do every day with us in the show notes. So definitely be sure to check it out. I love that your grades 4 through 5 through 8th grade, you have sort of listed all of the things that you're doing with them in your annual report. Friends, keep in mind, it's April 1st. So we're still not done with the school year, but you keep sort of this running dialogue, this sort of document that goes. And so your annual report, which you've included in the link in the show notes, is continuing, like you're just sort of filling it out in real time. And then I assume submitting it to your administration when you get evaluated. Your annual report really sort of outlines the things that you're doing with your upper grades. And then you include photos, which to me is so helpful.
So for the upper grades, because I knew I wasn't going to see them, I spent the summer kind of preparing in advance, and I did some research into passive programming. And I just came up with, I need to be organized, or I have to like see things out on paper, or I can't make it happen in reality. So I had basically split by month different passive programming that I wanted to provide. So I had options for interactive displays, provocation centers, which was just a fancy way of saying like a kind of invitation to research something further. Sometimes there were STEM stations. There was a make or grab and go, like something that they could take and finish outside of the library. And I can't remember the last one off the top of my head, but there was another one.
Friends, the wonderful thing is that when Aggie put all of her resources together, it is, you're like, it's incomplete. Well, yes, of course it's incomplete because it's April 1st. So, but yes. And I'm always fascinated to see what our end of year reports look like, because it is such a window into our programming. And I'm just scrolling through this, and it really, I got to say that an administrator looking at this would be very impressed, but a school librarian, or in this case, a teacher librarian looking at this, would have a much deeper appreciation for the kind of work that this represents. And when you look at what we do by the numbers, and when you have detailed your year so precisely with the things that you're doing, how you're spending your time, your valuable resources, and then provide some pictures. It really was fantastic for me to sort of go through this, because while I'm looking at your program, I'm also criticizing my own. I'm doing my own sort of self-critique and thinking, why am I not doing more in my own program? So yes, it's impossible to look at what somebody else is doing and not also turn and do that reflection and say, these are things I can be doing. That being said, I'm also aware that you are always learning from other school librarians. And there is evidence that you have connected content that you have picked up from the podcast and put it into your own practice.
Yeah, I have to say your podcast is like a treasure trove for teacher librarians or school librarians, whatever name we have, media specialists. I know we all have different job titles, but yeah, I mean, the one that comes to mind right away is Melissa Corey with her visual book lists. And ironically, I didn't realize I had already been using Melissa's resources because we're in the same Facebook group of Canva librarians, and she shares so much of her work and her labor in that group. And I had already been using her resources. And then also just listening to sort of the programming that other teachers do in their library. I've already gotten ideas for next year. I can't imagine being a teacher librarian without this sort of community of support.
Well, and I think each social media platform lends itself to different ways of sharing. And I know Facebook for me has been especially good because you can target those types of supports and sort of throw out there, say, hey, this is a situation I'm dealing with at this particular grade level, or this is a goal that I'm trying to achieve. Can anybody give me some help in this respect? And so it really does provide a very targeted way to, sort of work on ourselves and what we do and what we provide for our students in our schools. So I'm really curious. I mean, looking at this right now, you've got flex time. And the flex time is this. So in this case, you would be in your library learning commons with the classes. How do you determine what you're going to do when you provide this flex time?
I have to be honest, this is the first year. This is my third year at the school, and this is my first year where I've really started having more teachers interested in collaborating. My first 2 years here was mostly just me and one or two colleagues who were very open to it. And so, assuming that that was going to be this year, I only gave myself an hour in my schedule for collaboration. And I am now running into the problem where I have many teachers wanting to collaborate and not as much time. So I've been borrowing time from my library management time. I've also been kind of eating into my own prep time, just because I have a very hard time saying no when teachers want help and want to work together, which is going to dictate my schedule next year a lot. But it's mostly decided by the teachers. They will come to me and say, hey, the ones that they're most interested in is research skills. I've had interest from as young as grade 3, 4, all the way through grade 8. Can you show my students how to use the databases properly? Can you talk about the importance of citing? Can you include some AI and why we don't use AI? And how do you use MLA citations? So that's the biggest request from teachers. And then I've just gotten in the habit of when I'm in the staff room during lunch and they'll be talking about like, oh, we're going to be doing this and this. Like 2 teachers are talking like, oh, tell me more. And they'll just be like, oh, we're thinking about doing a unit on, I don't know, one that came up recently was my colleague was talking about, oh, she's going to do a dystopian unit. She's like, I just don't know I don't know. She's like, I want to talk to them about dystopian. I want to teach them dystopian, but I don't know what the end product should be. This is one of our gifted classes. And I said, what about combining it? We have a first page contest that the CBC, or our broadcasting corporation, puts on here in Canada, where they hold a contest for students from across Canada, and they write in the first chapter of a novel, and the start is always the same. The prompt is always the same. Imagine what the world looks like in 50 years. Write a first chapter of a book. And so that's what we did. So we didn't actually get to submit because it was after the time frame, but we used that as a springboard, and we taught them what is a dystopian story, and we looked at what is a engaging first chapter of a story from different genres, and how do we now put those two things together. And they were writing the first chapter of a book. And that just happened because of a conversation that I kind of overheard in the staff room. So that's kind of how I get more teachers interested in collaborating, is just kind of going into the classroom and being like, oh, hey, I noticed you're starting a new unit in social studies on international organizations. Did you know that I have a huge plethora of experience with international organizations that I can help you with? So yeah, it's just basically reaching out. And so I would say it's half and half. Sometimes they have an idea of what they want to work on, and sometimes I suggest something and how we can bring the library into it.
Your reputation as a thought partner and as an educator who also can shoulder some of that expectation of teaching has got to appeal to a lot of your teachers. And it sounds like once they figure out how willing you are to work with them, it's only a matter of time. I find it interesting. You are connecting, especially with a lot of the school librarians here in the States who have noticed a drop in reading interest as our students are getting into middle school and really after grade, sort of fifth grade on, their interest in reading sort of drops off precipitously. And it is enough to cause one to say, what can we do to prevent this from happening, or at least sort of help our students realize that reading for fun doesn't end just because you're getting older, and hopefully addressing that. And you mentioned in here the middle school manifesto and the episode with Marcia Koschel. But this is something that school librarians and teacher librarians who have the good fortune to work with our students see happening, and we have an opportunity to intervene.
So I'm finding that 2 years ago when I saw the juniors and the intermediates during their book exchange, I was there to sort of assist the students in finding something to read that would interest them. Not being in the space when they come through and knowing that their homeroom teachers, they do their best, but all 3 of my homeroom teachers that are in intermediate, their specialty and their love and their passion is not literacy. It's math, it's science, it's history, geography. They tell me, we struggle. We don't know what to recommend to the students. And so my thought process was, what are some strategies that I could employ to make browsing easier for the students when I'm not there, but then also what is in my control is my schedule. And so next year I'm hoping to change it around a little bit. We're going to be shortening our book exchange periods from 40 minutes to 20 minutes. I'm only going to be seeing our very youngest students on a weekly basis, just our kindergarteners, to teach them how to use the library. Because when I look at the statistics for checkout, just without fail, grade 1 through grade 5 is through the roof. And I don't see the grade 4s and 5s. So I would, one could say, it's because you see the younger students, that's why they're so high. But I don't see the 4s and 5s. And their checkouts, my grade 5s consistently have the highest checkout every month. But after that, it just drops. It drops significantly. And my 8s especially aren't checking out stories at all. So my thought process was, since I have the same amount of time next year, we already know our timetable, our schedule for next year and our assignment. I'm not going to be given any more time in the library, unfortunately, as much as my administrator wants to. Her hands are tied. That's what the board gave her. If I shorten the periods to 20 minutes for book exchange, then I can hopefully be here for more of that and also open up the schedule for that co-teaching where I could try and bring in more of a culture of reading or a love of reading, not just to the students, but to the teachers, to the whole school, and really work on that programming. So that's kind of my long-term goal for next year.
Sometimes our projects take time, sometimes they take money, sometimes they take both. And in this case, that consistency of service, if you are there year in and year out, there is a possibility, there's a better chance that you might end up getting that because it is something that you can sort of work on behind the scenes.
As much as I wish I could have more time, I know the way staffing works in our board and in most boards in Ontario, it's based on population in the school. We're a small school. We have only about 350 students total from JK through grade 8. We also have double programming. We have our mainstream, and then we have gifted from grade 4 to 8. So students are bussed in for a gifted program. We have a much bigger school just down the road. That's also K to 8, but they have a much bigger, I would say their population's double ours. And the staffing for library is decided by the percentage of the number of students in the school. So there are school librarians, there are teacher librarians in my board who are 80-90% in the library, but they have 700-800 students in the school. So unless the board somehow changes that formula, this is where I am. This is my reality.
Got it. Let's go back a bit. You were a classroom teacher.
I was.
When you first started out, but prior to becoming a teacher librarian. Can you give us an idea, as somebody who lives and works in Ontario, Canada, what is the process for a classroom teacher to become a school librarian, or in this case, a teacher librarian?
In Ontario, you need to be first qualified as a teacher. You don't go to school for library sciences to work in a school library. There are boards. I know, for example, the Ottawa Catholic Board does not have teacher librarians. They don't have the budget for it. And so they do employ library technicians, I think they're called. And I'm doing a disservice to the title, I'm sure. In terms of wanting to be a teacher librarian, you would go to Teachers College and get a Bachelor of Education. And then once you're working in a board, you then need to go through what we call additional qualifications. And so these are offered through continuing ed programs, through universities, accredited universities. You can get it through the board itself. You can get it through our union. They all run courses. And to work in a library, you would take Library Part 1, which you can do online. Amazing classes. And then with that, you are then able to apply to positions in the board to be a teacher librarian. After you have experience working in a position for a year, you can then apply for Part 2. And then the last step is your specialist, your Part 3. So it's a 3-part sort of process. It took me about, I think my first part I took, I want to say about 6 years ago, before there was even a position open, because I knew it was eventually where I wanted to land. So I just took the course so that if a position opened in the board for a teacher librarian, I could apply. And that's kind of how I got my foot in the door, and I was lucky. Something opened at this school. I got the job, and I did that summer before I even started. I did Part 2 because I had a very short period at my old school sharing the position with another teacher. So I qualified to do Part 2.
Fascinated because having been to Toronto, it's my children's favorite destination. So, well, if you have, teenagers, the perk to living across the water from Ontario is that you can drink at 19 in Ontario. Yes, you can drink at 19. This was the case when I was growing up in Metro Detroit, that you could drink at the age of 19. If you go up to Montreal and Quebec, that's 18. And
oh yeah.
So yes, no,
that was our favorite destination in high school.
When our children turned 19, but then by the time we also went up to Quebec and to Montreal, my quasi-adult children, they were in their late teens, early 20s, really just had the best time exploring these lovely cities by drink menu. And that is how the Herman children learned how to drink. There we go.
You're welcome.
But, Toronto is one of the world's, I think it is one of the world's most linguistically diverse cities. How has that sort of found its way into the programming and the collection that you have built out for your students?
If we're speaking linguistically, when I arrived at the school, we had a fairly large foreign language, I guess we could call it, collection. We call our English language learners multilingual learners here, just because we assume they're learning more than one language. Most of them are. Most are learning English, French, and their home language. We had, when I arrived, a huge Farsi collection. More than half of our population is Iranian. We get new students from Iran on a monthly basis coming in. We also have a very large Chinese population. And so those two collections were pretty large when I arrived. We also have Arabic, Korean, Japanese, and Spanish. So those are the sort of collections that we own. I mean, they're not extensive in any sense of the word. They each fit into a bucket. But we do have everything from picture books to graphic novels to a few chapter books to try and accommodate sort of our youngest to oldest language speakers. And then right when the Russian war on Ukraine broke out, we had a huge influx of Ukrainian refugees arrive. And so that was the collection that I built out. We have now a bucket of Ukrainian, and because the Ukrainian-Russian history is so mixed, there's a lot of Ukrainian refugees arriving who also speak Russian. So we have a bucket of Ukrainian and Russian books as well for those students. So we have students who arrive who speak not a word of English, but when they come to the library, they can usually find something to read in their home language, and it's usually duolingual. So it'll have their home language and the English as well. We also have a dedicated teacher. She's the MLL teacher, multilanguage. She works with those students regularly, helping them develop English. Yeah, so that's sort of the collection development itself when we speak linguistically. And those are housed together. Like, we don't keep them with the other collection. I think that would be a little overwhelming for newcomers. It is, though, very intentionally right next to the graphic novel section that we have, because what I found is as soon as those students have been at the school for a week or two, they notice what their classmates are checking out more often than not. It's Dogman, it's Diary of a Wimpy Kid, which I know is not a graphic novel, but it's close to it. They're checking out all of those graphic novels. And so it's right next to it, so that their next step into what they want to check out is right next to it, and they don't have far to go. And that's the first place I usually find them is venturing into the graphic novels.
Well, and something I discovered is when I was supporting our students who were learning English, and it was, moving to the graphic novels, there wasn't any sort of stigma to it because the section was the most popular section in our library anyway. And so they really just blended in with all the rest of the students because they were just picking up the most popular books we had. And the parents were just grateful that the kids found something that they wanted to read. So I'm curious because as a teacher librarian in Canada, tuning into the podcast, which has been dominated by American school librarians who have shared their craft over the years, have you been able to glean from those conversations the kind of helpful resources and strategies, despite the fact that by and large, every conversation is with an American speaking about the challenges and the goals and objectives that we have on the podcast?
100%. I think the first thing that drew me, the episodes that really jumped out at me when I was kind of scrolling through the titles, was anything to do with collection management. That is my jam. That's my happy place. And so I've been toying with the idea of genreification and ditching Dewey since I arrived in this library. But I was never comfortable with it. I was so hesitant. And after listening to your guests talk about that, the success they had, and I wish I remembered the teacher's name, but I know her blog is called Don't Shush Me because it's amazing.
That is Kelsey Bogan. Yes.
Yes.
Kelsey Bogan.
After listening to Kelsey Bogan and going on her blog, I was like, that's it. I'm doing it. No going back. So this year we ditched Dewey. I'm in the process of stickering the new sections, and the students, I had a little nonfiction student committee come and help me, and they came up with the topics and they organized the books and they came up with the titles for each of the sections. So that was a huge success. We've had nothing but positive feedback for that. And I then started a literary genre unit with 2 different classes, an intermediate and a junior. And just last Friday, I had my intermediate class come in. They pulled every single fiction book off the shelf and genreified it for me based on what they had learned. There were a few corrections we had to make, but by and large, they did a great job. And tomorrow, I have my juniors coming in, and we're going to see how it goes. We're going to genreify our graphic novels and our series, because I had pulled sort of the popular series that, the long ones that always keep going and going. We pulled them off the regular fiction shelves. We're going to genreify those. We haven't really discussed or thought about, are we going to integrate them into the other section of the library? Are we going to mix chapter books with graphic novels? Potentially. We'll see how it goes, but they're going to apply what they've learned in the library as well. So, it's been an ongoing project, but I was totally motivated by your podcast to even go down that road.
You were very generous in sharing with us is this a presentation that you put together?
I just finished my Part 3 specialist for teacher librarian, and my 2 huge final projects. One was I had to do an independent learning project, and I had chosen to research active and passive strategies on how to engage junior intermediate students as readers in the library, because that was sort of what I was noticing, that fall in checking out books after grade 5 that we talked about. And so that presentation I shared was literally all the strategies that I had gathered from your podcast, from my research, and from trying them out in the library myself. Some I've done, some I haven't. Just ways that we could try and build a culture of reading in older students. So the ditching Dewey and genreifying pictures are in there, the actual process of the work. And then the other thing, the annual report, why you mentioned it's not done, it's because it was one of the projects that I had to do for the AQ, the additional qualification. So it's not done because I just did it. So.
Well, but I think what's wonderful is anytime we look at the work product that another school librarian, or in this case, teacher librarian, puts together, in this case, this is so you qualify, so you can satisfy the requirements of your certificate. It gives us a visual and is providing us with the best practices that have helped you move forward and ones that you have tried and tested in your space. I am curious to know if Ontario is experiencing a teacher shortage like we are in the United States, because of course, I'm going to be making broad, sweeping generalizations, but I'm curious to know, is it a good time for somebody to become a teacher librarian in Ontario? Would you recommend this path, this that you've taken, to colleagues?
So that's kind of a double-pronged answer. If I were to take my experience, not looking at statistics, I would say we do not have a teacher shortage. What we have is a shortage of permanent full-time positions. But I'm speaking as somebody who lives pretty much in the south of Ontario. And Ontario is huge. We do have a shortage of teachers who are willing to work north of the major cities. We have a shortage of teachers who speak French. And we have a shortage of tech qualified teachers at the high school level. So in addition, I did a quick Google search when you asked me this question, because apparently we are going to have a much bigger teacher shortage in 2 years because we have a retiring population and a lot of kids, and our immigration population is growing. So I think if you want to stay in a major city, I think to become a teacher, there has to be a time period where one would have to be comfortable doing a few sort of what we call LTOs, long-term occasional positions, where you're filling in for a teacher on mat leave or on sick leave. And it probably, I would say, on average, takes about 3 to 5 years to get a permanent, secure position. If you're already a teacher with a permanent position and you want to become a teacher librarian, 100%. 100%. Because to do that first AQ, you can do that without having a position, without having your foot in the door. It's literally the way to get your foot in the door. And as soon as those positions come up on the vacancy lists, they come up every spring, you can apply for them, and if you have the qualification, your chances of getting it are higher. So, yeah. But that being said, I'm just going to throw this in there. Teaching in Canada, very different than teaching in the United States. Very different.
How so?
Well, number one, and I to this day will say that my US colleagues are heroes, because I could not imagine going into school with the reality being what it is with gun violence in your country. I cannot imagine that being a daily fear. Every time I see it on Instagram, it just blows my mind. And I remember there was a meme, or not a meme, it was a quote, a teacher. I wish I knew who it was, and I wish I could attribute it to the teacher. But when this whole thing came out with ICE going into schools, there was a teacher who said, if you didn't want us to give up our students, you shouldn't have taught us to take bullets for them. And that, to me, spoke volumes about what teachers do in the States.
I also saw that. And I said, yeah, no, I actually am very aware that the workplace, the prevalence of gun violence in American schools is at an unacceptable level. There is no acceptable level for gun violence in schools.
There is no acceptable.
But it is a reality. And the fact is that we have been doing lockdown trainings for a long time now. And it truly is, this is something that has only become exponentially worse. As an educator, when Columbine happened, I remember, and friends, I'm just going to date myself right now because I was pregnant with our oldest. So Columbine, I believe, was 26 years ago. And I remember going to school the next day and really just, I really had to talk myself through it, because Columbine had happened and there were a lot of copycat threats, and I was choosing to walk into a school, and I was, I think, 5 months pregnant with our oldest, and truly just being absolutely confused with what the decision that I made to go to school. But this is my job and I need to go to work. And that has been our reality. And unfortunately, the situation has become, I don't even want to use the word normalized. My high school is 20 minutes from Oxford. The Oxford shooting with the student who had their birthday gift, a gun that they were given for their birthday. And so I just, my own high school lost 2 students in the Michigan State shooting. It is an absolute, just unspeakable place where we are, because the expectation is that Americans have this right to have and own and carry guns with them often, and to make that something so acceptable.
It is not a reality that we have here. I don't know the statistics, but I mean, we had one college, it was a college campus shooting way back in the 80s. It was targeted against women. And we commemorate that every year. It was in Montreal, but that is not a reality for us. And that it is for you is heartbreaking for us up here. It is absolutely heartbreaking. And ironically, we have lockdown drills too. And to my knowledge, we have only had to use it once in an elementary school on my board, and it was for when a teacher unfortunately suffered a cardiac arrest and passed away in a hallway. That was it. I'm sure high schools might have more violence and they might have to call them more often, but it's never for active shooters. And that to me is, I am astounded at what teachers do in the States, going to work every day knowing that is the reality. So that is how teaching is different up here. The public perception is similar. There's not a lot, I wouldn't say. There's always people who complain that teachers get a free ride and that we have a great job and that we're always asking for more. We're unionized, and so our union fights for our rights and for our work-life balance and our pay. But it is a very well-paid job. It is. Our starting salary is well over $50,000. Our top of the bracket right now, after 10 years of work, is over $100,000. So quality of life as a teacher is good. It's good.
Well, and I will say that during the first Trump administration, one of our children declared themselves to be Canadian, and they were going to be moving to Canada as soon as possible because that was what they were going to do. And unfortunately, that was during the first Trump administration. I think they might decide to make good on that.
Well, you're welcome to come here.
And I will be honest, we are experiencing a teacher shortage in large part because current teachers like myself are not encouraging our own families to become teachers. When back in the 80s, when I was looking to go to college, I had 2 aunts who were teachers, high school teachers. And therefore, becoming a school teacher was a very natural choice for me. And because I had role models who were teachers, and I was encouraged to be a teacher. I've raised 3 children. And one of them is a burn ICU nurse. One of them is a mechanical engineer, and one is an artist. Now, one of them became a teacher, and they used to come to work with me. Sometimes I'd bring them to school with me, and they would spend some of those days off working in my library and helping me out. But not one of them became a teacher, and I'm fine with that. And for all the reasons you mentioned and more, truly. I do have to, before I let you go, I have to know, and I think I already know the answer to this, but book banning, is this a thing in Canada?
It is, but not even a fraction of the extent to what you are experiencing. We definitely, there are interest groups, there are conservative parts of society that have opinions. Most of the literature that is targeted is LGBTQIA in Canada. Race, not so much. Our board, thankfully, I work for a very progressive board. The people who hired me, my bosses, we have policies in place that enact equality, and they're all based on the Ontario Human Rights Code and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so when it comes to book banning, book challenges, people don't really have a leg to stand on because we're protected with policies and procedures that protect everybody's rights. And so if I'm just looking at my board, we have the Equity Action Plan, we have the Dismantling Anti-Black Racism Strategy, we have Indigenous Education and Equity Strategy. That's a very big push for us. The government's working really hard on repairing relationships with our Indigenous population. And so we have a very robust collection development policy for our school board, and it's basically guided by an anti-oppressive framework. So we talk about culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy. Critical literacy is part of it. Again, our curriculum consultants are fantastic. Every year at the beginning of the year, we get a stack of books that they bought that represent all parts of our society: LGBTQIA, Black students, Asian students, immigrants, all sorts of abilities and disabilities. And they provide that for us. And they ship them out to the schools already coded, ready to go. We just add them to our collection and off we go. And so we're very lucky. We're very lucky. We have a very supportive administration, and our superintendents are supportive. And so when it comes to book challenges in schools, I have yet to encounter an issue. We do have some book challenges in public libraries. Our Ontario Library Association has been keeping track of those. They're very on the pulse of what's happening in the States. Do have a Catholic school board, and they were under fire last year for doing some shadow banning. So they basically took some titles from that Forest of Reading program I had mentioned. There's always 10 nominated titles in a category, all Canadian authors, and the school board chose to keep any LGBTQIA titles in the professional library not accessible to students. And so that the media caught wind of that, and that was a huge, huge deal in the media. So it does happen, but not... Again, it's not something I deal with as a teacher. I don't have to worry that I'm going to end up fired for providing my students windows, mirrors, and sliding doors.
I am so grateful. Aggie, this has been such a wonderful opportunity to connect. You and I are, like I said, friends who text. So
we do about Tim Hortons.
About Tim Hortons, actually, it's WhatsApp. Thank you very much. I'm going to meet you where you are, and I'm using WhatsApp to talk to my Canadian teacher librarian friend. And yes, we were swapping our Tim Hortons orders, because here in Michigan, we have Tim Hortons in every city because it is that important. Thank you very much. And we're not doing this just to be courteous to our neighbors. Truly, we are incredibly lucky to be neighbors. And I'm hoping very much that our paths cross in the future. I'm going to apologize on behalf of a very embarrassed nation right now for the acts of our leadership, but I'm hoping that when we make these important, human connections, that we can sort of bridge any sort of differences we might have across our border. But Aggie, let us know. I have been thoroughly enjoying how much I've learned about you and your program. Would you let listeners know how we can find you on social media?
I've been on Instagram for a very long time. I have a public teachergram, I guess we call it. I'm at Canuck Classroom, so CANUCK Classroom. It's just a little nickname for Canadians. And I started that when I was still a classroom teacher. So if you scroll all the way back, you'll end up with English content and my French immersion content. But I do post sort of my daily life as a librarian. And then I just joined Blue Sky, and that's also at Canuck Classroom. And that's about it. I don't do TikTok. I don't do X. I'm simple.
No. Listen, it has been such a fun experience getting to learn more about you. I know that our paths will cross in the future. Aggie, thank you so much. I hope you have a fantastic rest of the school year, and happy spring.
Thank you. You too.
Friends, if you are curious to hear from school librarians around the world, then check out the link called SLU Playlists, found in the show notes of every episode for the 18, now 19 episodes, which feature librarians from around the world. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. The topic of our next episode will be working in Saudi Arabia and my conversation with Caitlin Wingers. I hope you will tune in.